So this is just going to be a little overview on modern day pump action shotguns. It's a follow-up to my video on classic pump action shotguns from many years ago, in which I talked about the Winchester Model 12 and Ithaca 37. Today I have three of the most representative shotguns you'll see on the North American pump action shotgun market. I have a 1967 Remington Wingmaster, a Benelli Nova, and a Mossberg 590. I'm not going to talk about the whole 870 versus 500 debate. This is more of a video on the Benelli Nova and how it takes some design cues from other modern day pump action shotguns, utilizing modern materials, manufacturing techniques to make a durable and reliable shotgun. So I've had the Nova for 5 hunting seasons now. It's my main waterfowl shotgun. I took 2 deer with it using slugs this past fall. I picked up the Wingmaster from the original owner who bought it new in 1967, and he shot less than 25 shells, he said. So it's pretty mint, and the 590 is new to me. I like it. So, and I have previously owned a Mossberg 500 field model, so I do have experience with all three. My first gun was a Remington 870 Express. Anyways, let's get right into it. So starting from the rear, we have the receiver and stock. I guess the most unique aspect of the Nova is that it's a uniform piece between the receiver and the stock, which is good, I guess, because then you don't have rusting of the stock bolts and no loosening up. Whereas the other two, you need to just check on them once in a while. If you want to have a stock that can screw into the receiver, you can also look at the Benelli Supernova. The disadvantage of the Nova is that if the length of pull doesn't fit you, then you probably won't buy the shotgun to begin with. Moving on to the receivers, so this is where things get interesting. Of course, people like the 870 because of the steel. People like the aluminum because it's aluminum, so that means it's rust resistance, it's lighter, and they argue that because the bolts steel and the barrel extension steel, there's steel-to-steel lockup, and there's no recoil forces directly on the aluminum receiver. And then we look at the Nova. So the Nova is unique in the sense that in 1999 Benelli used a stainless steel insert, kind of like a skeleton that has perforations throughout it. And then they basically overmold it with polymer, or technopolymer they call it, and that's basically fiberglass reinforced polymer. And you basically get the best of both worlds in the sense you get a rust-resistant stainless steel skeleton to begin with, and then you overmold that with plastic, which doesn't rust at all. And that makes it very easy to clean. It's relatively lightweight, given its 3.5-inch receiver, 3.5-inch Magnum receiver. The Wingmaster is 2 3/4, but the new models are all 3-inch, and the Mossberg is also 3-inch. So you can look at the receiver length differences here, and the Nova is quite a lot longer than both the 870 and 500. Next, we'll talk about the bolts. So the 870 Wingmaster has the chrome bolt, as well as a single machined extractor. Newer models on the Express are MIM, and people like to replace them. Mossberg utilizes 2 smaller extractors on each side of the bolt. And people like that because if one breaks, then you can basically still have extraction utilizing one of the extractors. And then we have the Nova, which also utilizes a single extractor. It differs from the other two in the sense that it has a rotating bolt, similar to the Benelli semi-autos, or a borrowed design cue from the Winchester Model 1200, 1300s, which also used rotating bolts, although theirs were multi-lug. And this is really useful in the sense that there's almost a assisting upon firing the shell of opening the action and cycling. It's quite smooth because the shell, upon firing, the bolt unlocks and kind of almost springs backwards about halfway. And so really you only have to move the forend the rest of the way, and the shells are already ejected and ready for the new shells to be loaded. So far, the Nova hasn't given me any problems. It's 100% reliable, as well as the other 2 shotguns. So You just got to be cognizant not to short shuck or short stroke pump action shotguns. Later on, when we take apart the shotguns, one smart idea that I thought Benelli incorporated was utilizing the bolt carrier and the bolt as one piece, as opposed to the Remington 870 and the Mossberg, which has separate pieces for the bolt carrier as well as the bolt. It's just one less piece. I think it's stronger, given that it's one monolithic piece, and I guess you could say few big moving parts is simpler and more reliable. And I think that was a design cue that they took kind of from Russian firearms designs or John Moses Browning designs, like the Ithaca 37. Okay, last thing I want to talk about, or last two things I want to talk about, are the shell lifters. So of course, people like the Mossberg because there's no shuttle lifter to begin with. You just drop the shell in and push it into the magazine tube. With the 870, some people don't like it because it's a spring. There's a spring that keeps it down in the down position and can get in the way when you're loading. And people don't like it because if they're wearing gloves, the tip of that shell elevator can capture the tip of your glove. Not really a big deal either way. Of course, the Mossberg is a little bit easier just because there's nothing in there. So one thing that I think Benelli did, which was really cool, is that they do have the shell elevator. However, when you push into it, it stays up. And so that way you can load kind of just like the Mossberg, super smooth and easily. One thing I also want to say is that somehow Benelli really honed the inside of the magazine tube. So when you're inserting shells, it's buttery smooth. The other two are fine, but there's like a noticeable difference when you're inserting shells into the Benelli. It just glides in there and locks into place. Okay, so next is the trigger groups. So this Wingmaster has the steel trigger group, which has the safety on the back and the action release forward of the trigger on the other side. Some people don't like that. I don't think it really makes a big difference, to be honest. The Mossberg, people like it for the ergonomics, given that the action release is behind the trigger that can be used by the middle finger while keeping your thumb on the safety and your index on the trigger, given that you're a right-handed shooter. It's also ambidextrous, I guess, if you're left-handed. On the 500 and 590 models, the trigger guards are plastic, and I guess they can break if you smack the trigger guard horizontally from either side, as there's two plastic tabs right here on each side that can shear off. Mossberg has reinforced them over the years, but I guess that's the advantage of the 590A1 with the aluminum trigger guard. But I'm pretty careful, so I don't really need that. And then it comes to the Nova. So the Nova has a crossbolt safety in the forward position of the trigger guard, similar to the Winchester 1200, 1300 design. It also has an action release up front, like the 870, but it's on the same side as the safety, which I think is a little bit more faster. It's a little bit faster to reach than the 870. And the trigger on the Nova is polymer. And I just want to talk about trigger pulls. So of course the 870 has a really light trigger pull because in 1967 people weren't really worried about lawyers and how heavy the trigger should be to prevent a negligent discharge. The Nova, surprisingly for a polymer trigger, has a really nice pull. I usually test them based on the weight of the shotgun. So the Wingmaster is about 7 pounds, and the trigger pull is at least like 5 pounds. Whereas the Nova is about 8-pound shotgun, and the pull is about 6 pounds. And then we have a 7-pound Mossberg 590. After cleaning out the trigger group and just oiling it lightly, it's come down to about 5 to 6 pounds as well. So they're all good. And because I've also like to shoot slugs at deer, so I need a little bit of a clean break. And they're all actually, they all have very little creep and break cleanly. So you can shoot slugs accurately with all three of these shotguns. Of course, this Mossberg 590 model has ghost ring sights, which I think are very good and well designed. They're really quick. And there's an orange kind of tip blade on the 590. So that's one of the benefits of their kind of tactical models. Moving forward to the forward end of the shotguns, Remington 870 in stock form is 4+1. Benelli Nova is 4+1. And the Mossberg 590, of course, is 8+1, but in standard configuration, it actually holds 5+1. All of them have dual action bars compared to the Model 12 and the Ithaca 37. But side note is that those ones don't need dual action bars because the way the barrel attaches the receivers through interrupted threads, and the bolt actually rides in cutaways inside the receiver, as opposed to these designs, which are more economical to have the bolt and carriers ride on the action bars themselves. So you do need to prevent any binding. Okay, so talking about the action bars themselves, this Wingmaster AP has the standard kind of corncob forend, popular in the 60s, 50s and 60s. Remington 870 was the first to use dual action bars, and it's quite smooth. Mossberg 500 series originally had single action bars, but I think after the patent for Remington ran out, they incorporated dual action bars, where the 870s are, I guess, one piece with the action tube assembly. The Mossberg action bars are pinned, so there's a little bit more slop, and the 870 has more of a solid feel, less kind of side-to-side play and slop, whereas the 500 and 590s have a lot more slop. And they do say that that gives it a little bit more flexibility when pumping the shotgun under duress, so that you might be twisting on the forend or there's grit, so there's a little bit more tolerances. Who knows? I don't think people have really had any problems with the 870 or Mossberg during hunting or law enforcement or military use. Now, one really interesting thing about the Benelli Nova is that it has a really long forend that's kind of wider at the rear and thins out towards the front. So it really allows people with different arm lengths to grab onto parts of the forend that feels more comfortable. One thing that I think Benelli incorporated into the design of the forend was to make it long. So if you look at both the 870 and the Mossberg, you see that the action bars are exposed like that. I wonder if Benelli created the polymer forend longer so it would cover those action bars to protect them from being bent or damaged while in use. And if you look at the modern sporting forends on the 870 and the Mossberg, I think that's also the same because they are a little bit longer. Not only is it more comfortable to reach if you have shorter arms, but if you look at the Benelli, like those action bars are completely protected, and there's no way of damaging them. Moving forward, the Benelli Nova has barrel ring with a sling swivel integral to it, and it uses a ratcheting ball detent magazine cap, same as the Mossberg 590, as well as the Remington 870. Newer Expresses have a different barrel attachment system. It's a nice feature that what Benelli did is that they really well thought out the shotgun. This shotgun was really well thought out in the sense that everything you need is already incorporated. So molded in sling swivels in the stock and integral sling attachment points up front. And one thing that really impresses me about Benelli is their machining quality of the barrels. It's hard to pick up on the video, but everything is smooth and well executed in terms of the machining of the rib. The barrel itself is chrome lined on the inside from the factory, and it uses mobile choke systems. It has two beads, fiber optic up front and middle brass bead. The 870, of course, this is vibra-honed back when Remington cared about their quality control, and the bluing is amazing on this shotgun, so it's also well machined. And then you have the Mossberg, kind of more of a matte finish on a steel barrel. Of course, this is a kind of 590 combat tactical you name it. So it's not really meant to be pretty, but it is beefy. These 590s have dual barrel rings for support as well as the bayonet lug. But just overall, the attention to detail and the kind of machining quality is noticeable on the Benelli. Just things seem a little bit more refined. Also, the finish they use is quite rust resistant to begin with, and it's smooth, matte, unlike the Remington 870 Express models, which are bleed blasted and they just don't really hold oil very well. What else can I say? When you cycle the action on these shotguns, they all have their unique voice. I'll probably incorporate a video of just the actions being cycled themselves. If there's anything else that I want to say, the last thing I want to say is the trigger group assembly of the Benelli Nova takes a design cue from the Winchester Model 1200-1300 and says that when you pop out the trigger group, the shell stop and shell interrupter are integral with the trigger group assembly. And so there's no pieces that fall out like when you take apart the Mossberg 500, 590 series. And you don't have the issue with these parts being staked in the 870s. So when they fall out, you need to restake them. With this, it makes it really easy to repair. If they're bent or whatever, you can just take out the piece and then just reattach it, reattach a new one to the trigger group assembly and then reinsert it. Yeah, so I think that pretty much covers it. For which one I like the most, I say I like all three of them. They all have a different role in my collection. With the 870, I kind of like to use that for an upland because it's kind of light. It doesn't have the rib, and it balances really well. When I rack the action on the Remington 870, everything is so tightly fit together that it rings like a tuning fork, similar to the Winchester Model 12 and the Ithaca 37. It is also quite smooth action, and you get that typical pump action sound. The 590 also has a very nice pump action tone to it. It's not as smooth as the 870. And the Nova, it doesn't sound like it's smooth, but it is, especially when you're firing it, given the rotating bolt assist. It does sound like a lot of plastic, kind of like sliding back and forth on itself, but when you actually shoot it with live ammunition, it actually is very quick and very smooth. I guess the last thing I want to talk about is the ejectors in these shotguns. Proponents of the Mossberg say that the ejector is screwed in, so if it breaks, you can just you can do it yourself. Just buy the part and unscrew the old one and screw the new one in. With the 870, it is staked, I think, or riveted, and if it breaks, you need to basically remove the rivet, put the new ejector in, and then re-rivet. And with the Nova, it's a piece that you can actually replace yourself. And it's a simple piece that doesn't even need a screw. You can basically just pop out a little roll pin, pull out the extractor, there's a spring beneath it. And in terms of ejection strength, I would say the Benelli Nova is #1 in terms of how far it ejects shells. It's very reliable in that sense. The Mossberg is maybe just as strong, or just in terms of how far it ejects shells. 870s are a little bit finicky. I know that modern day 870 Expresses, sometimes the ejection strength is a little bit weak, and you kind of get a stovepipe with them. I did have that with my old 870 Express. Wingmaster's not so much, but still the force in which an empty hull is ejected from 870s is just not as strong as other designs, and that's maybe just one of the only kind of downsides I found with 870s. But yeah, these are kind of this is an overview of 3 of the main pump shotguns you can find on the market. So this is just a quick overview on the action. So this is the 870 Wingmaster, chrome boat, chrome lifter, has a spring, so you have to push out of the way to load the action. Safety on the back, action release on the other side up front. So you kind of use it as a kind of port loading position. Very smooth. When you pull the trigger, it's very nice. Okay. Next up is the Mossberg 590. 500 the same layout. Top receiver safety. Index on the trigger finger. Middle finger on the action release. Let's look at the pull. It's pretty light on this one. My previous Mossberg 500 had a much heavier pull. No shell elevator in the resting position. Comes down when you rack it back, speeds it back up. Dual extractors, as you can see, and you can see the screwed in ejector right there. In terms of the action, a little bit more side-to-side play. People say that's more about reliability. Just shaking it around, you get a little bit more shaking, but in the field, if you're just holding it like this, you're not really getting too much rattling anyways to begin with. Also has the nice gold string sights. And last but not least, we have the Benelli Nova, 20 years old this year. Rotating bolt design. In terms of ergonomics, trigger, safety up front, action release on the same side. Show you the trigger pull. Plastic trigger, by the way. So, I mean, this actually has a really good trigger pull, especially for a modern shotgun. I would say it rates just behind the Wingmaster. In terms of the action, there's a rotating 2-lug bolt with a single extractor, as well as the ejector here that I was talking about. You can see that the bore is chrome lined from the factory there. Makes easy really cleaning. And it's all polymer here, but it's not like a cheap polymer like that they use on the Savages or kind of like the more low-end synthetic stocks. Also with this bolt, because it's a little bit of spring assisted, when you hit the action release, it opens up almost 2/3 of the way. So it makes for a really quick action. And then if you have an actual live shell firing, it just rides it all the way, it just pushes it all the way back. You just need to ride it forward. And then you can see on the forend, it's fatter, kind of closer to the receiver, and then it thins out more to the front of the forend. And early Novas had a lot of rattle, people used to say, and they would tighten up these Allen screws, but this is from the factory. And I guess if you're like really shaking it or rotating it side to side, it makes noise, but just holding it here and baking it, you gotta shake it really hard to make it rattle. So I don't think it's a big idea when you're hunting, just holding it like this. Like when I was deer hunting, it didn't make any noise. One thing that I liked about it is this magazine cutoff. So you open the action and you press this button, and then you open the action. It ejects whatever shell's in the chamber, but doesn't feed from the magazine. You can put whatever you want in it. So there were geese where I was hunting, so you could put goose load in and take the slug out, and then you can start shooting steel shot loads like geese. And so that's a really nice feature that no other pump shotgun that I'm aware of has utilized in history. So kudos to Benelli for doing that. I mean, obviously with the 870 and the Mossberg, you can do that. You have to basically open the action halfway, press the shell and magazine tube so it re-engages the shell interrupter, and then rack the shell out. But with practice, you can get really good at that too. But yeah, that's pretty much it for an overview of these shotguns.